What's up, world? Welcome to the Conversation on Mike Muse Show. I'm so excited to be in conversation with my next guest. He is also, not just a guest, but he's also my colleague at ABC. How cool is this? He's someone who I have watched and admired his journalistic career for a very long time. He has a fascinating career in journalism, and he always asks us as that moral question of what would you do, right? You know him exactly from that show. Ladies and gentlemen, the amazing John Quinones. What's happening, my friend?
Hey, Mike. Good to be here. Good to meet you.
Happy fall.
Yeah, I love it.
What are you most excited for about the fall, my guy?
The weather. You know, I live in Texas where it's been like 120 degrees every day, all summer. I used to live in New York, and I do miss New York City, but the falls are much nicer down there. But I'm looking forward to cooler
Do
temps.
you miss seasons changing, being in a one climate dynamic?
Yeah, and the vibrancy of New York City, of course. There's nothing like it anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
But I was born in San Antonio. It's my home state. So it's good to be there, and I'm right next to DFW Airport. You can fly anywhere, and I travel so much for What Would You Do and 2020 that, you know, as long as I'm close to an airport, it's cool.
Yeah, that's all that matters. I am from Michigan originally, and so for me, I love seeing seasons change. For me, fall is always and will forever be my favorite season, even over the summer. I just think there's so many cool things you can do, from apple picking, pumpkin, but also to fall gear and outfits and pumpkin pie and soups and stews and football. I just think it's just nothing like the fall.
I was cherry picking, but not for fun. We were migrant farm workers, my family and I, when I was 13, and we went up to north of Traverse City.
Traverse City, yes.
Northport, Michigan, the cherry capital of the world, where we picked cherries for 75 cents a bucket.
Wow.
And I remember teetering on the top of these ladders overlooking orchards of cherry trees, and it would take me 2 hours to fill that darn bucket.
Yeah.
With cherries. And then we followed the crops down to Ohio, and we picked tomatoes. It was tough work, but you know what? It built character.
Yeah.
And I was determined then to go to college and go into broadcasting.
Well, seeing all those different aspects and fascinations between the country, because in Traverse City is a northern part of the state of Michigan, which has a completely different way of living and more than the southern part of the state of Michigan. Then you go into Ohio. Was that what kind of formulated your curiosity of humans and human interest?
Yeah, because, you know,
that's a good perspective to see.
Yeah, it was unusual to have these Mexican kids, you know, come around the town on Sundays when we were done harvesting tomatoes, and at stores, and you know, we spoke Spanish, and we were a little dirty from working in the fields. People would follow us around the stores, thinking we're going to steal something in Toledo, and in Traverse City, presuming the worst simply because of who we were, because we were these migrant farm workers. So I think that piqued my interest early as a young kid when I was 13 years old, to want to shine a light on issues like this and explain how this happens to folks. They judge you by your appearance, and that's what Would You Do is all about.
That's what started the backdrop of What Would You Do. I've always wondered what was the origin story and narrative of that, because I think it asks such a moral question of like, what would you do? How would you react? And how would you feel?
When you think no one is watching.
Right.
It's the ultimate test, Mike, of a person's character. It's what we do, not when everyone's watching. That's easy. It's what we do even when we think no one is watching. It's all about doing the right thing, right? In the end. And I think people of color, people who have been marginalized, are more sensitive to that, and they'll be the first ones to speak up because they have experienced it, and I experienced it. And I think that made me want to do this kind of show.
I had a question over the weekend about morality, and I think that's why I'm kind of leaning into you right now with morality. Someone asked me about what do I think about America's moral fiber hasn't become undone. As you go around the country, what are your thoughts on morality within our nation? Because you get the chance to meet so many people who get put into these moral questions.
It's in the eye of the beholder, right? These days more than ever, we're so divided between what some people consider moral and what other people don't consider moral. And religion and you know what role that plays. I think we're more outspoken now than ever before. I think we're quick to react, and we will express our opinions. And we found this on What Would You Do right away, because our politicians are doing it, and the feeling seems to be, well, if those folks can do it, then I have every right to say what I feel, and of course, you do. People are quicker to respond. We found that women are better at coming to the rescue of people who have been marginalized or who are being abused, or somehow women, I don't know if it's the maternal instinct or they're just more brave than men are, because guys, we worry about something becoming physical, so they step in right away more often. Women, we worry about it becoming a fight. I'm a little concerned about the moral fiber of this country. Why don't we disagree about politics and religion, but do it with a bit of decency and respect? We seem to have lost that.
I'm just curious, and I know you're not here to talk about what would you do, but for me, what would you do is, let me back into it. I love pop culture, and I think pop culture is so significant because pop culture holds a mirror up to society and makes us ask these questions. Yeah. Whether it's a film we're watching, right? When it's done well, it makes us think, right? And done well, it doesn't have to be, Steven Spielberg status or Ava DuVernay status, right? Yeah. It just needs to be a good story. Right. I love when you go to a museum and you see a visual painting hanging from the wall and you stand in front of it. Yeah. It makes us react, right? It makes us sit with something, right? And for me, that's why I love, and music is the same way. And so that's why I love What Would You Do? Because you're seeing humans in their natural element asking these questions, like amongst it. How has this show shaped your constitution? Because I can only imagine you seeing these different scenarios and you're seeing different humans react differently. How has that impacted your constitution?
It reminded me that despite all the progress that we've made in this country, and we have made tremendous progress, despite all that, though, we have work to do when it comes to accepting people who are different from us. We have to be able to step back a little bit. We have to invite people to the table and to our homes and to dinner who are different from us. Right now, we're so segregated. We go into our own silos. We watch television news that confirms, not that enlightens us, but confirms what we already believe, right? So we need to expand on that a bit. You have to, we just have to do that. And when I created the show, we wanted to hold up a mirror to American society, as you mentioned, so that we're all better equipped to shine a light on issues. How do you unlock the power and the light that exists in all of us? Yeah. So that we're better equipped to say, hey, that's wrong, or how can I help?
Yeah. John, I don't want you to weigh into the politics aspect of this, but I'm just curious, do you think, because you mentioned this, like the silos, the social media that we're in, and this isn't condemning social media, I'm pro-tech here, but do you think that we're now like in these confirmation, affirmation, bias loops that exist, right? Because that now we can go in social media, we can find our tribes, right? Exactly. Find our groups, our subgroups that we're interested in. We're typically now hanging out with people who have similar views, more or less, as a result of social media, and finding the ones that connect with us. Because the way the media landscape is, we have so many different platforms and streaming services, so we have so much choice of content that we choose to watch. Yeah. Do you believe like that is making it difficult to have this Pollyannish nature of an exchange of ideas in civil debate that could possibly change opinions?
Yeah, I think the greatest thing we could do is give an opportunity to other folks to enlighten us about their stage in life, to listen to them and to feel them listened to and heard. In the end, I think that's the greatest gift we can give to someone else. And by the way, the greatest gift that we can give to ourselves, so that we are better equipped to say, I understand where you're coming from. Look, I think, we discriminate based on our DNA. When we used to live in caves, we had to decide what's going to eat us when we go outside the cave, or what we might have for lunch, right? So it's normal for us to presume to be on guard, right? If you're walking down a dark alley and there's some big dudes walking behind you, the hair on your head, the neck stands up because you're worried. That's normal. But the experts tell us we have to stop ourselves and say to ourselves, wait a minute, give us just a few seconds and say, you know what? This person that I'm just meeting, because we all do it. When we meet someone, we size them up by the way you're dressed and by the accent in your voice and the color in your skin. That happens to me, and people judge me like that often. The other day I was at an airport in Dallas, and I was getting on a plane, and I was flying in first class, and I'm standing in the first class line, and I noticed that all the passengers on my left who were in first class were in the wrong line. They were in the economy line, which happens, right? I'm in the right place. And I'm wearing a baseball cap and sweats. Nobody recognized me. And when I'm standing there, the lady in the front of that line, who had lined herself in the wrong line, looked at me and said, "Sir, are you even in first class?" And I nodded. I didn't want to cause a scene. I just pointed to the sign above my head saying, "Yeah, I'm first class." And then she goes, "Well, the first class passengers are over here, so get to the back of this line." I wasn't going to argue, so I went to the back of the line. And on my way back, she said, "The announcement was made in English. We speak English in America." Presuming that because I look the way I look, I didn't speak English. And then finally, the other people in line said, "John Quinones, is this a What Would You Do episode?"
Wow.
And I said, "No, unfortunately, this is real life." And as I'm standing in the back of the line, my only concern was that I was going to have to sit next to this mean lady on the plane, right? God, for 3 hours to New York. But no, she was by herself. No surprise there. And as I got on the plane, I couldn't resist. I leaned over and I said, "Man, my name is John Quinones, and I do this TV show called What Would You Do? And you would be perfect for the show. You could play the part of the racist." True story, man. We all judge. She judged me. She looked at me. She thought that I didn't speak English.
That's an amazing story.
True story.
And
Absolutely true story.
It's even amazing how you handle that. But I often too think about airports to this day is one of the most modern day contemporary examples in the physical structure that we have of classism and racism and othering, right?
Yeah.
And because of the fact that when you check into the airport, and the moment you enter the door of the airport, that's when classism begins, right? Are you TSA or TSA pre-check, right?
Exactly.
Are you global entry on the back end? Are you first class? Are you sky priority? Then you go into this security line, right? Are you digital ID? You can scan into a different line, and then you go in, and then you see the people. The distinction begins where you go to the airport lounge if you're Delta Sky Club, or Amex Centurion Lounge, or do you go into the general general restaurants and coffee shops and the food court stuff? And then there was a time when then you got to the gate after you leave the club, there was like a red carpet. That they noted that this is for the first class passengers, and then the other ones didn't walk down the red carpet. It is the most physical representation of classism. The racism exists because that happens to me all of the time, John, when I go into first class.
I had never thought of that. That's an excellent point. And even when you get on the plane, you can't use that lavatory because that's first class.
First class.
You got to go to the back.
And this isn't the Minority Oppression Olympics here, but to raise you one from a different perspective. Are you ready for this story?
Go ahead.
This one, me and a gentleman and his family, we were kind of boarding at the same time. Halfway down the jet bridge, the mom realizes that her son didn't grab his carry-on from the chair. He expected the mom to do it. She yells at him, has a fit. You have to grow up one day. You know, the parenting, notable. I'm being quiet. I'm just looking at them because they're standing in front of me. The father then looks at me and he says, you got to teach these kids lessons. They have it too easy. I'm not engaging. So I was like, yeah, I get it. And then he says, because, people like you and I, we didn't grow up with things and we have to be more appreciative of what we have. I didn't say anything. And then he says, you can relate, right? And I said, actually, I can't relate at all. I said, I grew up upper middle class. And I said, I grew up flying in first class, right? And I said, I grew up flying around the world. So, no, I can't relate to you, right? And then he was stunned, stunned. We then go further into the plate. He's not even in first class. He's in main cabin. He sees me stop. He's even more stunned. And then he turns around and says, what do you do? I said, that's not important. I said, but have a safe travel in a flight. So even the reverse happens.
That's right.
They see a minority and think that we all have grown up downtrodden, right? That we have grown up without access to things, but that stems from media and what media says, which I think is so important that individuals like you, John, are out there sharing your story,
Fly on the
capturing
wall.
these human interest stories to really teach us and enlighten us. It's important the place that you serve at ABC and all the other things you have done in your life and you will continue to do in your life.
Thank
So
you.
thank you so much for bringing your own human interest story and your own lived experience to tell the world through critical stories through your POV.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike, for having me here.
But audience, he is actually here to talk about something different.
Yeah.
Right? He's actually, but I wanted you all to get to know him. I wanted to learn about John too as well. I've always been very fascinated about you. He's here because he has launched a new ABC podcast, Vanished, What Happened to Vanessa. And the Vanessa that we're talking about, audience, is U.S. soldier Vanessa Guillen, who was murdered at Fort Hood. And it was a case that drew national outrage. Talk to us a little bit, John, about why you thought this story was so important now that we know your constitution of human interest.
You know, I do so many 2020 true crime stories. You know, right now, that's virtually all I do, in addition to what would you do, of course. At ABC, is we tell these stories, and my heart goes out to the victims. They're fascinating cases. We try to shine a light on the fight for justice for these families. But this one, I could relate to because it happened not far from where I grew up, you know, in San Antonio, a couple of miles north, on a military base. And the victim was this Mexican-American young lady, Vanessa Guillen, who was only 20 years old. Her lifelong dream was to serve her country, born in Houston, and then she suddenly disappears. And my nephew actually sent me an email from a text from San Antonio saying, have you seen this? They're looking for this young girl. And it had been a couple of weeks now that they were searching. And then I noticed on social media that the actress Salma Hayek posted something like, bring us back Vanessa, with a picture of this soldier. And I immediately started researching, and I called 2020 and I said, we really have to look at this. And we wound up doing 2 documentaries on it. But primarily because I met her family. They spoke only Spanish. I grew up speaking Spanish. And it was something that I hadn't seen on the air before. You know, missing girls who happen to be from the barrio or from poor communities don't get the attention or haven't gotten the attention that they deserve. And I wanted to make sure that we looked at this one closely, and it turned into a much bigger story because they didn't find her for more than 2 months, Mike.
I think, but you just said something really interesting in terms of Latina. There's so many missing women, in particular women of color, who go missing, that doesn't get the national attention of all local and national networks. The ones that we typically see are white women, and in particular young white girls, right? Those get the national attention. It's rare you see a black woman get national attention. It's rare that you see a Latina, and then it's also even rare that you see an indigenous women.
That's right.
They are also too underreported too as well. Was that something that you were thinking about in terms of when you wanted to uplift
because
this story?
I went to their home in Houston and I met Gloria Guillen, the mother, who was frantic, searching. Again, she spoke no English. And I walked in and I smelled tortillas, just like the way my mother used to cook back home. It's in a little ramshackle house on the east side of Houston, kind of like the barrio that I grew up in. And then I noticed in the living room there's an altar with the Virgin of Guadalupe, you know, the patron saint of Mexico. My mom used to have the same statue, and she was she was praying the rosary every night, because at that point she didn't know whether her daughter was alive or dead. So I connected on so many levels. And I was able to ingratiate myself to the family, and she opened up. And that's when she told me that Vanessa had told her, they noticed a change in her when she was assigned to Fort Hood from another military base. She suddenly seemed more depressed, withdrawn. She wasn't eating right. She was losing weight. And finally, they kept asking her, what's wrong? And she would come home on weekends, because it's only 3 hours from Houston, from Fort Hood. Vanessa would come home on weekends. And she finally confessed to her mom. She said, Mom, I'm being sexually harassed by a higher up at the base. And her mom was livid. She goes, well, in her broken English, said, let me know who it is. I'm going to go get him. And Vanessa explained to her that, look, it's a military base. It's a different kind of, litigation here. You can't just confront the abuser. So let me handle it. and then a few weeks later, she's disappeared. I just connected on so many levels with the story, and I could communicate with the family in a way that perhaps other reporters who didn't speak Spanish weren't. Local TV was covering the story, don't get me wrong, San Antonio, Waco, Houston, but it hadn't received the national attention that it deserved. And then, God, a little over 2 months later, her body's found just 20 miles from Fort Hood. Dismembered, burned, and buried in 3 makeshift graves out by the Leon River in Belton, Texas. The story just kept getting worse and worse, but it also ignited an international uproar thanks to social media, and then in the end, some reckoning in the military that changed things.
That's a gruesome murder, and I think that's gruesome for a family to have to discover their loved ones in that moment. Before we talk about some of the military actions, what was the feeling of the mother when you came, knowing that there was going to be national coverage that was going to occur?
She wanted any kind of coverage she could get. I mean, she
was there relief?
Yeah, she didn't fully understand the magnitude of ABC and the power and the reach, I think, that ABC had. But her other daughters did. Myra, who was the older daughter, who was a fierce fighter for justice, and her little sister, 16-year-old Lupe. They understood. They spoke English, so they also sat down with me. And, of course, they have their father, Rogelio, who, by the way, says that when Vanessa went missing, he felt a deep pain in his chest. He didn't know what it was about. He didn't know what had happened to his daughter yet, or that she was even missing. But he felt something. He tells me it's a premonition of what had happened to her, that she was really in trouble. But her sisters understood. The mother, I think, not so much. But the more she got involved in these protests, and they started putting up murals all over Texas, and even in Kansas, and even in Washington, D.C., of the picture you might have seen of Vanessa saying, I am Vanessa, where is Vanessa? Murals all over the state of Texas, Wichita, and Washington, and that even garnered more support. You couldn't even drive into the military base at Fort Hood without seeing the big picture of Vanessa, and it put a lot of pressure on the military. And the more we investigated, Mike, the more we realized that it had multiple scandals, that base. In the past, there were allegations of sexual harassment and sexual misconduct. In 2015, a Fort Hood soldier, a sergeant, who also served as a sexual harassment and assault advocate, he was convicted of running a prostitution ring.
Wow, my God.
On the base. In 2020, the same year Vanessa went missing, 13 Fort Hood soldiers died by suicide. In the 4 years before Vanessa's disappearance, more Fort Hood soldiers died in homicides than in battle. And in the year she disappeared, there were at least 28 Fort Hood soldiers who died, vanished, or in one case, turned up dead after going missing. 28 in 1 year. So there was a real problem, and I took it to the Pentagon, and they responded.
John, I just want to say that story is powerful in a number of different ways and tragic. But the reason why I asked that question as we begin to conclude was because I believe when a family has to deal with an ordeal like that, it's one thing to grieve in silence, but it's another thing to help with the grief process, to know that your loved one's life mattered, right? And people cared enough to show up, put a camera, and to cover this story in detail the way that you did. It helps to ease with the grief, to know that my child did not die in vain.
Exactly.
And that my child's death isn't silent and isn't being ignored. And I'm just thinking about so many more families who, unfortunately, because of background and dynamics, who have to grieve their loved ones in silence. And I think that makes the grief even harder about the value of life. And was my child's life not enough to get national attention? So
and it's inspired the sisters. The sister is thinking about running for Congress. The little sister Lupe, who's now 21, wants to be a journalist. So a lot of good has
Yeah.
come from it. And you will hear new interviews on the podcast
Yeah.
with the family and from the military to see what changes have occurred since then.
Well, John Quinones, we cannot wait to listen. Everyone, find this podcast wherever you find your podcast. It is entitled Vanished, What Happened to Vanessa by my guy, John Quinones. John, thank you for everything that you do, my friend.
I want to be back. We'll do this again.
Come back anytime.
All right, brother.
Until next time, folks. Peace.